Now for session 4 of day 3 of the UEF World Summit. This session takes you to the next level with Industry 4.0, accelerating growth through product, process and scale. I would like to welcome back as our moderator, Mr. Azmat Tawfiq, the founder chairman of Blue Monsoon Capital, a Singapore-based investment and advisory firm with key focus on emerging markets. He is a 20-year veteran of World Bank's International Finance Corporation, based in Washington, D.C. Over the last 10 years, he has overseen investments of over $3 billion across various regions and sectors. He is also the chairman of the investment committee of the Tamil Nadu Infrastructure Fund Management Corporation, Government of Tamil Nadu. Over to you, sir, to introduce the speakers and enlighten us on this topic. The Industrial Revolution has led to a significant boost in global economic development and productivity. Modern manufacturing industries have created opportunities for scale, employment and job creation, especially for unskilled labor force, tradability, spillovers and dynamic growth gains. India, despite being the 5th largest economy in the world, represents only 2% of the world's manufacturing output, which accounts for 16% of the country's GDP. This gap between India and the rest of the developed world in industrialization is primarily due to manufacturing firms with labor-intensive practices and limited technology, leading to a lack of output and complexity. Increasing competition from China, Bangladesh, Vietnam and Indonesia are also some of the many challenges facing the growth of industrialization in India. The role of the public and private sector is fundamental in advancing this growth and disrupting the traditional economies. Government policies to encourage innovation and productivity, along with the smooth transition to Industry 4.0, will elevate India's industrial prowess. Industry 4.0 is here, and it is time to accelerate growth through product, process, and scale.
Good afternoon, delegates. We start now our session on Industry 4.0, accelerating growth through product, process, and scale. Industrial activity contributes a major portion to the economies of India and the social development and economy of all nations and regions, including, of course, Tamil Nadu. For the purpose of this panel discussion, we define industry fairly broadly. We include, of course, traditional industries that have driven Tamil Nadu's economy for decades, but also some service industries. Such as heavy engineering, which accounts for $2.5 to $3 billion of exports from Tamil Nadu, and roughly 1/5 of the national production of machinery equipment. Textile, leather, and cotton, a very traditional industry for Tamil Nadu, very important one, accounting for 20% of India's textile output and 60% of yarn output, and generating direct employment of nearly 3.5 million people. Automobiles and components accounting for more than 1/3 of India's auto component production and almost half of India's auto exports, if I have the numbers right. Electronics and hardware. We have at least 23 electronic parks in Tamil Nadu, which together account for nearly 20% of India's electronic manufacturing. In pharma and biotech, Tamil Nadu is the 5th largest in India. In chemicals and petrochemicals, Tamil Nadu accounts for 6% of India's chemical output and is among the biggest producers of plastics in the country. We have a world-class power industry, a power sector, both traditional and renewables, in which Tamil Nadu also leads the country in many respects. And we have a thriving services industry, not the least of which is the entertainment industry, including the production of world-class movies, movie producers, actors, technicians, and a host of other direct and indirect participants. Impressive as these numbers are, if we were to look at this in the global context, we have some ways to go. We have a solid foundation, but if we are to achieve our aspiration of growing at 1.5 times the national average over the next 5 to 10 or 20 years, and that to a growth that is broad-based, that is inclusive, that is complex, that is resilient, and that captures a larger share of the global value chain, then we must think and act more now. To help us understand these challenges and these opportunities, we have on our panel today an eminent group of global thinkers and participants in a cross-section of activities in the industrial sector. Let me introduce them to you now. We have the privilege of having with us today Tejpreet Chopra, TP, founder and CEO of Bharat Light and Power Group, a leading clean energy generation and technology company in India. Before founding BLP, TP had an illustrious global career with GE, including as head of GE and all of GE's business lines in India. We also have Vipin Sondhi, Managing Director and CEO of Ashok Leyland. Vipin has over 3 decades of experience in manufacturing and engineering-based companies such as JCB, Honda, Tata Steel, and Tecumseh. We have Nasser, who needs probably no introduction to most of our delegates today. He is a well-known Tamil actor, producer, writer, director, lyricist, and singer, and is currently president of the South India Artists Association. On a personal note, I have to add that Nasser was partly responsible for my reintroduction to Tamil movies with his powerful role as Jaladeva in the now epic movie series Bahubali. I'm not going to embarrass you by saying how many times I've watched that series. And finally, we have joining us from Washington, D.C., my former colleague from the World Bank Group and IFC, Sabine Schlocker. Sabine is currently the Global Head of Manufacturing and Services Department at IFC, and in this role, she leads a diverse team responsible for IFC's investments in the manufacturing sector worldwide. I had the great privilege of engaging Sabine in a fireside chat just before we started this live summit. It was a fascinating discussion for me and went on for quite a while, more than an hour. We will start this session with an extract from that fireside chat. I also had the great privilege of engaging Nasser in a conversation which also lasted for almost an hour. But we will now play, after this Sabine's fireside video, an extract from that chat with Nasser. For those who might be interested, the full fireside chats will be available on our website. So here we go. We start with the fireside chat with Sabine. Hi, Sabine. Good afternoon. So great to have you here. We are going to talk about Industry 4.0, and especially coming from the IFC and your background, how do you see Tamil Nadu in particular, but India in general, growing at a rate that we all aspire to grow, and especially Tamil Nadu at the rate of 50% more than the overall growth rate of India?
Thank you, Asmat. Looking forward to our conversation.
Say that, you've been at the IFC for a number of years. 10 years in infrastructure, 15 years in manufacturing, global manufacturing, including now as the global head of manufacturing for IFC. When you look at the world, what does manufacturing mean to you?
Manufacturing is a very interesting sector. It is a sector. It's not a value chain. It's not a product. It's a cross-cutting sector, and many times we mistake it with value chains like health or textile garments. Manufacturing for me is at the core. I am in financing. I've been working for many years in manufacturing, financing manufacturing companies, but my root is in development, and I'm looking into development economics. And I'm very convinced that manufacturing is the path to development and to growth, which is underlying development in many ways.
I know that you have been not only active in terms of investing in manufacturing businesses, but also in thinking through and writing about manufacturing and how does that relate to growth and development. I know that there was a very interesting article that you and some of your colleagues have shared with on the IFC website, etc. I would like to put up one chart from that.
So manufacturing in IFC has been divided into many different pockets, like textile garments, automotive, chemicals. And we have had specialists in executing in these subsectors doing very successful transactions. But if you look at it from a development perspective on why manufacturing plays a major role, we had to do a lot of work developing a framework and an approach on how we would like to select companies to work with. And what you're seeing here is the core of the approach that we're taking in selecting companies that we want to work with. So as we look at the world from our side, is there are two different parts in how we are dividing an economy, which is drivers of production, which is in many ways where focus lies. These are the enabling sectors for production. Those drivers of production are part and they need to be developed as your structure of production is being developed. So the structure of production includes two different components, which is scale. So manufacturing only happens at scale. It does not happen in small volumes. You need scale in order to make something happen. We can talk about scale as we go along in our conversation. And the second part is very important. It's complexity. So we have done a lot of work around complexity. We came from economic complexity and why economic complexity is so closely linked to the wealth of nations. So we're looking at complexity in your product. So what are you producing? Is it a complex product? Is it a non-complex product? Give me examples of a complex product is a car, that has, I think on average, a car has about 80,000 parts. T-shirt in itself, doesn't have that many parts. It doesn't require as a product that much of different innovations. The same is true for base chemicals. If you produce ammonia is a non-complex product. On the process complexity, we're speaking a lot about Industry 4.0. Many times people are speaking about process complexity, which is, smart machines, robotics, AI in production, preventive maintenance, lean manufacturing. It's really how complex are your processes to get to the product that you're producing. And the last part we're looking at in production is the value chain complexity. With value chain complexity, we mean of where are you within the value chain of production. Sure, when we're looking at companies and firm level, we're looking at where are you right now, but we are much more interested in what are you doing to get to the next level. So how do you change complexity and scale in your production to get to the next level? So what is it that you're doing? And as you can see, this is not a single answer because every company can have a different approach to that.
What lessons can we draw from those experiences, such as those of China, such as those of Germany, such as those of South Korea, in the Indian context?
There is not one way. And I think if you go into the history of already industrialized and successful countries, I think you will find very different pathways to success. And I would really recommend to look into how countries have industrialized, but also how successful manufacturing companies have developed over time. There are very different ways of how this has happened. So just the example of China that you brought up, which is the most recent example. And I think China is still on its path to building complexity. It's been very successful over many years, but it's not only through export orientation. So we have built, following this framework, we have looked into countries, into where countries are in their path to manufacturing and manufacturing value added. And we have organized them by complexity and manufacturing value added. And we have, on that basis, we have built 3 pillars for intervention. And these pillars, all 3 pillars have the same interventions in the same categories, but in different ways because it depends on the complexity of their underlying industry. So let me explain the 3 different parts that we look at every single country. First is, what is your base material industry looking for? You cannot have a successful manufacturing industry if you do not have the materials for manufacturing. It starts with chemicals, base chemicals, and it has cement, It has all sorts of materials that you use to produce a product. If you're not having the base materials in your country, you gotta import them. No matter of how sophisticated and complex your products are. If you do not produce these base materials, you will have to import a very major value in the value chain into your country. China has very successfully, as they have built up their export orientation in labor-intensive industries, they have very successfully at the same time built up the base material industry in that country. I talked to the German Chamber for Chemical Industry, and I asked them, why do you still produce base chemicals in Germany? You are not competitive in pricing. And they said, we will never give it up, because this is the foundation for our more specialized chemicals. Then we're looking into what kind of value chains you're working in. So are you focusing on the domestic market, domestic value chains, servicing the local and domestic markets? So examples for that are construction industry, that's usually very domestic, food, fast-moving consumer goods, beverages. These are domestic industries. The last one is what many people are focusing on, which is the export-oriented value chains. And industrialization processes many times start in labor-intensive, simple assembly processes. Examples of that you have in the textile garment sector, where when we speak about textile garments, we usually speak about the last step in that industry, which is the assembly of the garment. And as it deepens over time, you become more complex in the assembly. The assembly is producing the final product, but it doesn't mean that the manufacturing companies in many emerging markets own these final products and the value added in these final products, because many times this is owned by companies that are outside and they are contract manufacturers. So you have to really look on how relationships are and how complex it is what you're doing.
I know that textiles and leather both have a long history, and Tamil Nadu is a proud producer of large quantities of textile goods. And yet, if you look at our competitiveness vis-a-vis some of the global players, and look at how much value we capture, it seems either pretty static or in fact even going down.
This value chain is actually really interesting because it starts basically with the material. So let's think first of what are the materials that we're using in textile garments. The materials are cotton, and there's a huge demand for more organic cotton and very big pressure on the brands to do more sustainable to promote more sustainable practices in cotton. The second major material that you have is oil, fossil fuels, for synthetic fibers. And the question is, how much do you produce in your country? It's coming back again to the base materials. China has captured the whole value chain. And they have captured in production from the base material to the final product, the value chain. Where China is lagging is that they still don't have the brands, which is the hardest thing to develop. And I just bring it up in China. For example, in the automotive sector, China up to date has hard time to develop OEM or a brand. But I see what is very successful is the integration in the value chain and to solve problems all along the value chains. And manufacturers, specifically in textile garments, with the way of how brands are becoming increasingly under pressure to solve sustainability issues.
So we basically are artisanal, we are small scale. Any advice as to how, not just in textiles, but leather industry also is a very important industry in Tamil Nadu, historically has been, and even today, especially for our chamber, for our members. Any advice on how they should be looking at it? I know prescriptions are not easy to provide.
But within that framework, a manufacturing company has to make choices, and they have to put up strategies on where they want to go. Do you want to stay in a mass product where you're competing potentially with countries that have much lower labor cost, where scale is playing a major role in lowering your cost. You can do that. There's no issue in doing that if that's your strategy. But then you have to be aware that you have to produce at large scale, that you have to source your materials at lowest cost possible, and that you probably have to invest into your process technologies. The other one would be to move to a different product, which has a little bit of a higher margin, but allows you to use the skills that you've set in producing a low complexity product to do that. It's the next step that you can go with not that many adjustments, and use all the skills that you have built to go to the more complex product. What do I mean? I think when we stay in the textile garment sector, you probably want to produce now athletic wear, leisure wear, right? So this is the more difficult one, but it has a stronger growing market. So you will have to potentially invest also in process technology. You will have to invest into skills and training of your workers because it's a very different fabric. It requires different skills. The third way is that you say, okay, in order to survive my higher cost, I have to increase my margin. By increasing my margin can be by backward integrating, right? So basically you don't have to buy in and then your margin on a product is only 5% or 10% as you're transforming it into a final product, but you're basically also producing the fabric. That requires significant investments because the earlier stages in the value chain are quite capital intensive. One of the major issues of why I think South Asian leather industry is not taking off is the quality of the leather. So we're back in the material.
When it comes to quality of the leather, the tan leather, somehow we don't get there. And I guess there are several reasons for that. One is investment in technology, investment in expertise. And the second is just, a mindset that, in the medium term, in the long term, better quality will get better scale, will get better margins, and will get a better, more sustainable business.
There are so many things that are so important for the brands that are buying and that you want to be in the value chain of if you want to be successful in that space. One is just animal welfare, right? So that's a mindset, animal welfare. The second one is really how do I use chemicals in the process? The whole sustainability question.
Absolutely.
And it's becoming increasingly important.
How do we, we've seen what's happened to, let's say, where you live, in the United States, where a lot of, there's talk of a lot of manufacturing having been outsourced, having offshored. And as a result, and partly as a result of that, people losing jobs and a lot of the social tensions, et cetera, that arise out of that. And this is a real fear that this might happen in the context of India, in the context of Tamil Nadu, especially because we have a large population and employment is an issue.
Let's talk about the hollowing out of manufacturing and the premature deindustrialization and the share of manufacturing in GDP and the share of manufacturing in jobs. And we've heard this a lot, that manufacturing is a declining share in GDP. I think it's the wrong measurement. And I give again an example. I went to a company in Germany that is an industrial champion of an industrial equipment. So there are usually 2 or 3 different companies globally that are manufacturing this kind of equipment. There are 2,000 people, and they're classified into manufacturing. So they're classified as being a manufacturing company, and they're counted in the official statistics of the country as being manufacturing. The second question I asked the company was, of how many people in your company are working in manufacturing? So they are producing the product with the process technology on the shop floor. 200. So 10%. The remaining 1,800 people in manufacturing were not working on the shop floor.
Shop floor.
In many countries, specifically in the United States, a lot of service jobs are outsourced that are connected to production, right? And to say then there is no manufacturing, you have to see how much is there and what is done in country. The design, the technology, the product design is still in the country. But what the United States is suffering from is what Germany and Europe in many ways has not done, is they have lost base material industries. Right? And that is the problem, because if you want to do good design, you need the materials and the material research. That company that I visited in Germany, they were doing equipment for manufacturing, pressing equipment. But they worked with Daimler-Benz, doing new carrosserie parts in carbon, lightweighting the vehicles. And they basically, totally out of their industry, did something totally different, but using their skills. This is what complexity is. And this is what diversification is. They're using their core skills, which was building pressing equipment, to go from an industry they worked mainly in the furniture space. They now started working with Daimler-Benz in the automotive space, because the problem that they were very good in using is, how do I press materials and what kind of materials do I press to get the qualities that I want to have in a product. And that can be used across multiple value chains. It's a foundational thing that, this is where the network works. And the last example I give on this one is, I'm German, so I went to Daimler-Benz production. It was very fascinating with it. At the end of the company tour, they showed me an E-Class Mercedes, and they had cut it in half. And I saw all the parts in that car. 95% of the parts are within a 200-kilometer radius produced of that company, of Daimler-Benz headquarters in southern Germany. 95%.
Within 200 kilometers?
Within 200 kilometers.
It takes me to another important industry in Tamil Nadu, which is the automotive sector. We are the auto capital of India. But question is, how much of that is really, does it have depth? Does it have sustainability? Can that be moved by a decision made in Taiwan or Korea or somewhere else, and almost overnight disappear somewhere else if our competitiveness in terms of the labor cost is eroded, or for some other reason? How do we move from where we are in the automotive sector in Tamil Nadu to a more complex, a deeper, and more sustainable auto sector, and basically capture a bigger part of the value chain in Tamil Nadu?
In the automotive sector, I would ask first of, where are you? Are you in the domestic market, or are you in the international market? So are you producing for export? Are you producing for your own markets? It's usually quite different companies. The question which in the automotive industry always comes again and again and again is the question of localization. So how much is being produced within a certain radius of a company, or within the country, or within Tamil Nadu? Localization is not happening very much, right? So you probably have a tier one. It depends on how much cars you're producing in your region. And there are very clear guidelines. When I started in the automotive sector, I had a great chart from our industry specialists who looked into the number of parts that need to be produced in order to make something economically feasible for a company to invest. For example, in seats, but this is 10 years ago. So for seats, for example, there were 50,000 seats that were needed to be produced for a seat manufacturer to make it worthwhile for them to invest close to a manufacturing plant. If you have, smaller parts like very specialized screws for the tires, further, the lower you go in the tier. So the tier one is very specialized towards the OEM. The tier two produces for the tier one. And the lower you go, the less specialized these companies become on a value chain. So if I'm in a forging company, I don't need to produce for cars. I can also forge parts for other equipment, and I just, my specialty is probably that I have a large forge and I can forge large parts. In many countries that have automotive industries successfully built up, the connection to the lower tiers is really lacking.
I know that you focus on private sector, but any thoughts on what, from an industrial policy standpoint, our policymakers in Tamil Nadu could be doing to attract a stronger base across the value chain for auto sector? How do we stimulate?
The auto sector is so interesting because it's also one of the most, I think, industry that everyone wants because it's so complex, right? It's a very complex value chain and it's a very complex industry. Let me just make a few comments on the automotive industry. I think it's really hard to break in. And I think up to date, China has not broken fully into the OEM space. So that's one point that I would like to make. It takes a really long time.
Korea has.
So then Korea has, but you lead me to my next points. China, the reason why China is so big in automotive right now and why it has such a good space for tier companies and also manufacturers the final products, mainly in joint venture with existing companies, is because of their domestic market. They have become the largest automotive market in the world, overtaking the United States. That's huge. They are the market. It's not that they are producing for export. And that then leads me to Korea, right? South Korea. South Korea and Japan have very different development models. They are the only OEMs, the Japanese and the Koreans, that have not developed based on their local markets. They are the only OEMs, or the clusters. They're the only OEMs who have developed or based on global markets, right? Very different approach. And that answers your question also on bond policy.
In charting our path in Tamil Nadu, as a Chamber of Commerce that we represent and that that our constituents represent, we want to play a very active role in the development of Tamil Nadu, and we want to play a very active role in coordination with the government, especially in these important sectors. And the point that I want to take away from what you're saying is that both have an important role to play. Industries that are relevant to Tamil Nadu. One industry that's very relevant to Tamil Nadu is the IT/technology, software, how you define it, what we generally in Tamil Nadu call the IT industry.
IT is a very broad thing, right? It's the application of IT that's important. I think you've built up a very good skills base. And the question is, how do you use it for the benefit of Tamil Nadu and not for the benefit of companies outside of it?
But more generally, broadly, is in the context of how we help ourselves, our constituents, our members, and the state grow. And that's the topic of inclusion. We'll be talking more about this in another session. But do you see that as an important part of the overall mindset, overall cost competitiveness, overall value addition, overall brand building?
Inclusion is a central part of competitiveness, productivity. It should not be a side thought. It should be a core thought of what you're doing in your company. We have a lot of research in IFC that if you are more inclusive in your business, you are going to be more successful. It should not be as part of corporate social responsibility. It should be part of your business and everything that you do in your business.
Listen, I'm glad you're back.
Thank you.
And I have to say your screen looks even better now, so I'm good.
Okay.
Now, we were going to play the session with Nasser, and unfortunately, he's not here live today. Vipin, would it be okay if we asked you to do your presentation now, and then we go on from there?
Yeah, so thank you, Azmat. Can you hear me clearly?
Very clearly, yes. Can hear you.
Okay, thank you. My apologies, the system crashed at just this time, but I'm back again. I don't have a presentation, but I'll have a few points to make if that's all right.
Great.
Well, namaste to everybody, the audience, but to my co-panelists as well, and to Azmat. It's a privilege for me to be part of the UEF World Summit, share my views and experiences from the perspective of manufacturing, specifically automotive industry, and thank you very much for your kind introduction. Industry 4.0, without doubt, is a game changer, will continue to be in the manufacturing sector. It offers us an opportunity to dramatically accelerate growth through product, process, and scale. That's the topic, and it's very, very relevant. It will enable us to significantly improve an operating efficiency, quality, reliability, but importantly, a direct connect with the customer for sales and after sales. So essentially, it covers the entire gamut of the value chain. It focuses on interconnectivity, automation, machine learning, real-time data. Referred to as smart manufacturing, it marries physical production operations with smart digital technology, machine learning, big data to create a more holistic and better connected ecosystem for companies. And it enables access to real-time insights across processes, partners, products, and people, the 4 Ps. Industry 4.0 isn't about investing in new technology and tools to improve manufacturing efficiency. It's actually about revolutionizing the way the entire business operates and grows. Now, examples. Number 1, supply chain management and optimization. So actually, Azmat, you can leverage supply chain management capabilities. Companies can deliver products and services to the market faster, cheaper, better quality to gain a competitive edge. Number 2, predictive maintenance analytics. IoT systems can sense when problems are arising, machinery needs to be fixed, solve potential issues before they become bigger problems. And predictive analytics allows companies like us and many others to not just ask reactive questions, what happened, but also proactive questions like what is going to happen, what can we do to prevent from happening. These type of analytics can enable manufacturers to pivot from preventive to predictive maintenance. Third, asset tracking and optimization. With IoT in place at a factory, employees can get much better visibility into their assets, their equipment, and by using an uptime control center, tasks such as asset transfers, disposals, reclassification, adjustments can be streamlined and better managed centrally in real time. And fourth, customer connect. Digital connectivity, GPS systems enable us to stay connected with the customer through the entire life cycle of the product. So it's not when you make the sale, but for the next 10 or 12 years, definitely. And this offers opportunity to deliver higher product reliability, real-time predictive maintenance. And we can get insights into the product usage and deliver products which can enable future products to be designed for future specific needs of the customers. And as we see the evolving trends in technology, we can clearly see that the future will be more and more digital. Large companies have to take the lead on this, develop digital platforms, leverage them across tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 suppliers together to enhance the collective capability of the entire supply chain. India has a natural advantage. Tamil Nadu has a natural advantage when it comes to digital because our software companies are housed a lot in the south, including Bangalore, of course, but Chennai and some of the other towns as well. And we have world-class capabilities, and we should harness this to an absolutely optimal level. If I might just say a word about Ashok Leyland being an integral part of the industry landscape of Tamil Nadu ever since independence, 1948. So about 72 years now. The auto sector, the auto component manufacturers together have built a strong base, built on innovation, ingenuity, and inclusion. The state has support industry, entrepreneurs, and worked together for the economic and social development of the people. And the state has developed significantly, as you said, Azmat, ranks amongst the highest on economic parameters like per capita income, education, vocational skills, and employment generation. And specifically, the Chennai industrial belt has developed as a prominent automobile cluster with large and multinational companies setting up operations here. This has been fostered by a vibrant environment for ancillaries, service providers, technology centers. And the state has focused on the development of infrastructure and logistics to enhance efficiencies across the entire supply chain. It's become a significant export hub for automobiles and other industrial products. A lot more can be done and a lot more will be done, but this is where we are. So thank you. These are my opening remarks.
Thank you, Vipin. We'll come back to several of the points that you have made today, including about, especially about the auto sector and about the use of technology and the world is getting more digital. All of this cuts across the themes of many of our discussions. So we'll come back to some of those things. But for now, can we go to you, TP, and request you to share your insights in the context of how we can grow at 1.5x of the national average.
Great. No, thanks very much, Azmat, for inviting me to be part of this panel. And thanks a lot to Ahmed and UEF. It's a real honor to be out here. More so, I have a real affiliation with Tamil Nadu because, believe it or not, I was actually born and brought up in Tamil Nadu. So, and I also speak better Tamil than I speak Punjabi. So I'm really one of these unusual people. And therefore, when I heard that this was an event relating to Tamil Nadu, I figured it was absolutely a real privilege to be part of it. Azmat, I'll just quickly open up by saying a few things with regards to the way the world is moving in terms of manufacturing with AI and IoT, and I'll build on a couple of the critical points that Vipin has just made. Point number one is, I don't think we have a choice with AI. It's absolutely against us right now. You know, if I look at a couple of the statistics that Forrester has said that AI-driven companies this year and by next year will take $1.2 trillion of economic value from its competitors. So therefore, it's absolutely imperative. Another statistic that I was reading recently, that in a PwC report, which said that by 2030, the potential contribution to the economy of AI will be $16 trillion, and the addition to global GDP will increase by 14% thanks to AI. So I think just the way things are shifting so dramatically, I think this is something we need to really focus on and take forward. Now, what's really driving this change? If you think about it, what I see what's happening in COVID is sort of when I think back for folks like me, when things went from the old tape recorder of music to CDs, when that went from a very analog, format of music to a digital format of music, I think when we scale it up right now, COVID's going to accelerate the transition from an old way of doing business. It doesn't matter whether it's in my friend Ahmed's steel power plant generation, all the way through to auto industry. That's what's going to happen right now. And what's driving this change is going to be not a linear change, but an exponential change. Now, what do I mean by that? The driver for this exponential change in the adoption of AI and machine learning and this industry 4.0 industry is going to be driven by the following. The first one is sensor prices have come down dramatically in the last 7-8 years. So our ability to collect data and extract data from a manufacturing plant has increased significantly. 2, mobility and networks. The ability for me to get data from thousands of wind turbines in every corner of the world virtually for free is changing the way that we can actually do all these AI systems. 3, high performance compute, which was once upon a time only in the domain of large corporations like IBM. Today, it's available for all of us in the universe to utilize. 4th, new processes in AI, robotics, blockchain, and the ability to use that high performance compute combined with the cloud is what's making this entire revolution go from a real linear perspective to an exponential perspective. Let me just share a quick story, and I think all of us know that. Back in 1996, the Kodak company's market capitalization was $28 billion, and it had 140,000 employees. By 2012, Kodak was bankrupt. At that same time, in April 2012, a small little company called Instagram, with 13 employees, had a market capitalization of $1 billion. By June 2018, Instagram's market cap was $100 billion. And therefore, it is this democratization of technology that's driving the change of what's happening in AI. Let me just very quickly, Azmat, share with you what we are doing at industry.ai in terms of where we're going with all this. Let me just quickly share a quick story as to why we even did this. Our core business is to build, own, and operate wind and solar farms. We were investing large sums of capital building these wind farms. And as you know, in my previous role at GE, I would share with people that turbines don't fail. But the sad reality and sad truth is that the failure of the smallest component shuts down a $3 million turbine. And that kept happening until one day, 5-6 years ago, one of my turbines burned down to ashes. And that's not a pleasant sight when you see a 120-meter turbine absolutely all on fire. That's when we ended up creating this AI platform. It's called Orion, where we started monitoring thousands and hundreds of tags of data every second from our turbines. And using AI, we could predict a failure in a gearbox, generator, bearing, hundreds of hours before it actually shut down. That's how the journey started. And today we are monitoring thousands of wind turbines and solar farms in every corner of the world from our control center in Bangalore, where we can improve these systems and improve uptime for all these turbines. And over time, we've done projects across different industries. Let me share a few examples, Asmat, in terms of how we've actually made change happen in manufacturing across different industries. For one of the largest FMCG companies, and coming from a world where we used to make aircraft engines, gas turbines, and steam turbines, I now have a deep-found respect for people who make soaps and shampoos. In this particular case, one of the largest FMCG companies, what we found was that a 2% variability in moisture content when you're making over 1 billion soaps was resulting in millions of dollars of wastage. And that's what we were seeing. And by developing these algorithms, we were able to reduce the variability of that moisture content by 2%, which solved the problem. Now, that same kind of an example is applied in oil and gas, chemical, pharmaceutical, or any process industry where variability is a huge issue when you're doing large quantities of manufacturing. A second quick example, in the steel industry, for a 1.6 kilometer steel line, what we've been able to do is by just digitizing every system and every process in that steel making process, we've been able to improve OEE in the manufacturing process by between 3 and 4%, which resulted in huge positive productivity gains in the steel making process. A third quick example, for one of the largest railway wagon owners in the world, where he wanted to improve the efficiencies of his fleet. Right now, what happens is him as an asset owner of railway wagons leases these wagons out to large corporations who then gives it to someone like the Indian Railways to move the wagons around. What we were able to do in this situation was that usually in a railway wagon, there's no power source. So we had to adapt the IoT sensors and gateways to put under the wagon so that now we can track where the wagon is, 2, reduce the maintenance costs, and 3, extend the life of the wagons. And let me just give you one fourth quick one example. Visual analytics. Today, we have the ability to convert any camera in any corner of the world and think like a human brain. In one of the biggest airports in our country, what we were able to do is connect the existing infrastructure to be able to detect when someone's social distancing is being breached, if someone's not wearing a mask, if crowding is happening, are the queue times in the check-in area very long. We could not only track the turnaround times of the aircraft. So the use cases of different applications across every industry is going to transform the way industry is done going forward. So with that, Asmat, let me turn it back over to you. And like Vipin said, I truly believe a state like Tamil Nadu and Karnataka, given the heavy, intensive engineering expertise that resides in these states, this could be an incredible opportunity to take advantage of providing these Industry 4.0 technologies, not only for India, but to the world.
Thank you, TP. Great points, great examples. We want to come back to some of them. I would like to very quickly play the fireside chat with Nasser, and then I have a bunch of questions, both from my side for each of you, but also stream of questions coming from this, which I'm trying in some kind of a logical format. So in the meantime, while I'm doing that, can we play Nasser's video, please? So we have a very famous and busy but very famous personality in Nasser, well known to many of our delegates, certainly well known in Tamil Nadu, well known across India. But we also want Nasser to express his views with regard to the growth of the Tamil Nadu economy and how the industry, the entertainment industry in general, the cinema industry, and people like him who have already made huge contributions to Tamil Nadu and India and to the cinema industry, how they see or how he sees the growth of Tamil Nadu and the contribution of the industry to Tamil Nadu and India. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on this fireside chat, Nasser. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Azmat. Good morning, everybody. First, I would like to thank UEF, who has created this meaningful and purposeful and progressive webinar, or whatever you call it. And I'm very happy and proud to be sharing this time with the Vipin Sondi, Ms. Sabina Shlok, Mr. Tejpreet S. Chopra. Sincerely, I'm very happy and proud to represent entertainment industry. You know, as the research or the history says, before man could invent wheel, he got entertained himself. They used to dance around the fire and they narrate how he killed a lion or how he killed a deer. And they had to entertain. It's a very great thing. No other living being have this thing called entertainment. It has been there for a long time, and as the science grew, as the technologies grew, and it has become an industry where we involve lot of technologies. Any technology is invented, immediately it is used in film industry, be it robotics or sound or anything, pneumatic. Titanic, when they made, they use a lot of hydraulic equipment to make the film, to make the ship roll and whatever it is. So it's a very fast growing industry. And as an art form, definitely it's the greatest art form. It is a very young art form.
When you were talking about technology and skills, I was reminded of, I was in China a couple of years, I go there frequently. I was there a couple of years ago, and I went to a technology studio devoted to, film production. And many of the films being shot in Hollywood, being produced in Hollywood, are being technically processed in this massive production center, technology-driven production center in Shenzhen and other parts of China. And with the technology we have in India, with the technical people we have in India, with the education we have in India, is that a possibility that not only can we be a powerhouse of film production for Indian movies and Tamil Nadu movies itself, but also as a technology base for the world?
Yes, we can be a global player. Now we are trying to satisfy the regional, needs. Maybe it's a Malayalam film or a Tamil film or this thing. But yet, it is, once Hong Kong was, a hub for doing computer graphics from all over the world. Even in India, if you want to do some computer graphics, they had to go to Hong Kong. Hong Kong is the tiny dot in the map, but they were able to do it. But here, as I see, the challenge is when the studio system was very strong in India, and particularly down south, when all the language films were made in Madras, then called, when the studio system was very strong, they were looking ahead. Because their investment is not in the film. Their investment is on the studios. So to keep the studio running, they have to make the film. So film becomes secondary. So they designed the future in a way that it should be very progressive, very prosperous one. But now lot of single filmmakers have come. Now the money flow is just like that. Anybody who can sell a plot and get 2 crore rupees, he can make a film. Right? It has become very simple. But again, I think Madras was a very stronghold of filmmaking. There was Gemini was there, the AVM was there, Vijayawahini was there, then Bharani was there. So it's such a great, such a such a vast areas have become real estate now. But now, even now, we have places around Chennai where we can bring that studio system. It has to come back, but it needs a lot of investment. Because in China, in US, their situation politically, economically is different. But still, we can make, because a lot of spaces is around, in and around, not in Chennai, around Chennai, where now accessible infrastructure, the road is wonderful. You can reach anywhere 60 kilometers away from Chennai, you can make. But unless we bring a studio system again, we cannot face this challenge. Individually, yes, of course, small things we can do. So it is very sad. It is very sad that we lost our studio system in Chennai. We were losing theaters. But on the contrary, I'm sitting in Ramajrao City, which is about 2,000 acres of studio. They have entertaining section and shooting there. Even now, the studios are very full. Most of the Tamil films are made here. I think this should come back to Tamil Nadu. So when investments are made as a studios, not a film, as a made, yes, and you need a lot of skilled people and you need a lot of professional people to run the studio, and it becomes better. That's what I think.
You spoke about the talent that we have in Tamil Nadu. You spoke about the technology we have in Tamil Nadu. And you also said we should get together and think how we can bring all that together to create a more powerful competitive position for Tamil Nadu in the global value chain of the cinema or the entertainment industry. And I think that's a great idea. Do you think, I mean, certainly I would love to follow this conversation up with you in a different forum as to see how, if any way in which we can stimulate this thought take further. Who do you think should be the actors in this kind of a conversation, at least to begin with, but also in terms of how to implement this? Does government have a role to play? Policymakers have a role to play in this? Do civil society have a role to play? Who do you think should be the key players in this kind of discussion?
A government, of course, should facilitate what this industry needs. Once the best infrastructure we had in whole Asia, we have lost it. And now, absolutely, there are no studios. I'm talking about studio as as an institution, but shooting floors, we don't have proper shooting floors. I think government can help to bring back the infrastructure what we had. Here in Hyderabad, as I'm sitting here, I'm talking about this. When Telugu films shifted to Hyderabad to make their own films, the government gave a wonderful infrastructure. Now, everybody knows who is in the industry. More than Bombay, Hyderabad has got a wonderful infrastructure to make a film. So government can help. Definitely, our government is helping. I'm not telling that they're not, but still there's not a proper representation to them. So a government can help us to bring back the infrastructure. Mainly, we need space, land or something like that. But again, civil societies, I don't know how they are there to receive content. But content providers, content makers, they have to take it more seriously.
And this is the big takeaway from here. I just want to touch on one more thing that's really important, and that is the employment potential of this industry.
Okay.
And there are so many people, even in the where you are sitting right now in Andhra Pradesh. There are so many people in the site that must be employed there directly and indirectly. But do you have any estimate of how many people are directly employed by the Tamil Nadu entertainment industry, movie industry?
As per the union's statistics, roughly in Chennai, about 25,000 people are involved in making this film industry running. 25,000.
In Chennai alone?
In Tamil films alone. That they are involved in making the film. And again, there are now the computer graphics has started playing a very important role. Apart from that, there will be around about 2,000 to 3,000 people. About 30,000 people are working in Chennai alone. And so employment now, after this digital technology, you can sit in Madurai and edit a film. You can have a center in Coimbatore and do editing or computer graphics. Now, so it is expanding. It is expanding, this digital technology. First, I was very, I don't know, I didn't accept this digital technology. Now I have to accept. It has got a lot of possibilities to grow, to go ahead.
The impact of the movie industry, especially in Tamil Nadu, on the potential, especially the potential impact on the brand of Tamil Nadu. Because what we want to do is to make Tamil Nadu an attractive destination for everybody to come and do business and to contribute to our growth and to contribute to the 1.5x growth.
Yeah.
Do you see what role we can play in the industry to that branding?
We can definitely be a brand. Tamil Nadu, it was a brand. It is not a new thing in Tamil Nadu. It was a brand. Chennai was the center of filmmaking in India 50 years back. Tamil films were made here, Malayalam films were made here, Telugu films were made, Kannada film, even Hindi films were made here. They had the best studios that time. We have lost it. And we have to bring it back. The brand ambassador was there. Maybe he had taken a small vacation. We'll bring him back. We will bring him back. The only thing we need is we have to have a very transparent discussion. Very, of course, government is friendly for this thing. So definitely we can make Tamil Nadu as a brand. Government has given the only thing we expect. Government has to give a space and infrastructure. Of course, now we have banking, we have loans, we have everything. Now there are scattered infrastructure where you have to run around there. So now if we bring a hub of filmmaking, because filmmaking has gone beyond entertainment. Now the visual, what you and me talking over this online thing, it is a film in a way, theoretically.
Correct.
Now everything has to be conveyed in a very narrative way. Education is becoming very narrative. History, geography, science, or whatever it is, a thing is taught to a child, it has become a narrative media. It has become a film of another kind.
Yes.
So you need not restrict making films only to entertain people. It is applied in so many other ways. A filmmaker or the investor should think in such a broad way. It should be entertaining films must be part of the visual industry. You need not restrict to entertainment media only, because now everything is visual. Everything is visual. You don't see a picture, you don't believe it. Be it Google or whatever it is. You want to see. You want to see.
We are entering the golden age of communication.
Yes.
And visual communication through visual media. You have so many different options, as you said earlier. And therefore, the potential of this industry to capture the minds, the hearts, not just in Tamil Nadu, not just in India, across the globe, is enormous. And the potential to contribute to the economy of Tamil Nadu and to contribute to the brand of Tamil Nadu is enormous. You play such a big role in this. I know you are such a busy person, but it's a real pleasure to have you here. We are going to continue with the panel discussion, and I know that you will have a lot more to say in that. But I want to thank you again for taking the time and providing me certainly with a lot of knowledge. And I really enjoyed this conversation with you.
Thank you, Tawfiq, and I thank UEF to given this time to share my views. Thank you. I'll be with you to take us ahead. Thank you.
Very much. Look forward to
Thank
following.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. So coming back to our panelists who are live here, I want to go straight into some discussion here. One of the things that has come out very frequently these days is the possible opportunity for India and in general, and Tamil Nadu in particular, to take advantage of the massive disruption that has taken place in supply chain, global value chains in the last 1 year or so, especially during COVID. How, in the face of competition from major players like China, like Korea, like Vietnam, like Indonesia, some other countries across Asia in particular, how does Tamil Nadu capture a bigger part of the global value chain in manufacturing industry? Maybe we can start with Vipin with you, and then Sabine and TP, could you also think about this issue? You're on mute.
Excellent question, Azmat. I think it's very topical as well. As global supply chains are looking for a China plus one option. I don't think they can just move out of China, but they look for a China plus one option. We have an opportunity to seize in India, and Tamil Nadu in particular with its strengths. But it won't be easy. These won't shift automatically to India. As you mentioned, there are other aspiring countries as well, Vietnam, Bangladesh for textiles. And then there are other countries like Japan, Korea, etc. But some of these, the latter named, have built ecosystems of manufacturing companies over decades, and they work in tandem, and they collectively become global export hubs. So if they move to Southeast Asia, to Indonesia, or to Thailand, these companies move together, especially Japanese companies. Now, we have not been known for providing infrastructure which is plug and play. So if I would say one thing over the next 18 to 24 months, government focus or public-private partnership on building public play, plug and play infrastructure industrial parks, complete with land, labor, and water and electricity and roads. The other is, I think we've sold ourselves on low-cost software development and business process outsourcing for too long. And this needs to change with us moving up the value chain. We are ahead of China in that, and we must do that, but we must do that for our own country as well. Finally, Tamil Nadu in particular. India is leapfrogging in electric mobility. Not ahead of China, but leapfrogging. There are lots of investments being made. And each stakeholder has a role to play in spearheading the initiatives to promote EV adoption in the country. And a government is a major part of that. There are government subsidy programs as well. And the interplay of all these stakeholders is essentially for streamlining electric vehicles in transport systems, specifically public transport systems and e-commerce transport systems, in creating a favorable EV ecosystem. Now, elements comprising the ecosystem include the operating infrastructure, as well as supply chain of batteries, motors, battery management systems. Now, this is a huge opportunity for Indian companies, not just the OEMs, but the entire value chain to come together, grab the opportunity with both hands, and develop technology and capabilities for world-class electric mobility. And for that, we will need agility, we'll need adaptiveness to be successful, not only for EVs, but right across in the future world. And this environment will keep changing. If we think change has stopped, it won't. There'll be another disruption. And this will come in unexpected ways and can't be predicted. The best way to prepare ourselves, therefore, is to build new skills and accept the new ways of living and working. Like we did in telecom, electric vehicles present us with an opportunity to leapfrog. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll come back to the issue of electric vehicles, but let me first go and ask the same question. I have TP, if you have some insights to add on this topic.
No, great, Azmat. I'd say, to build on the points that Vipin mentioned, I'd say 4 or 5 key points that I think our country we can really improve on. And I think COVID's giving us an incredible opportunity to the point that Vipin said on the N+1 or finding an alternative supply chain, given the fact that existing supply chains are broken. I think we are moving in the right direction. The government has come out with a few really encouraging policies like the National Manufacturing Policy of 2017, the National Program on Artificial Intelligence in the 2018-19 budget. I think the other 4 or 5 areas that I feel that we can really take advantage of, not only as a country, but as a state in Tamil Nadu, are the following. One is infrastructure. For manufacturing to really succeed, we need core, strong infrastructure. Because once you have strong infrastructure, it makes supply chain easy. It makes supply chain economical. So therefore, we need the basics and the fundamentals of infrastructure, whether it's electricity, roads, waterways, transportation. So the whole thing around infrastructure. 2, education. I think while we do produce a lot of engineers, the question is, do we produce good engineers? And how do we raise the skill sets of the entire educational base in our country to improve the entire base and quality of manufacturing? And linked to that is skilling. I think there's a lot we can do in our MSME sectors, which may be tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, to help them also come up in this whole chain. A 4th area that I think we could go a long way is around gender inclusiveness. How do we bring more women into the whole manufacturing sector? There are some incredible women who are engineers in smaller towns like Madurai, Coimbatore, Mysore, who really don't get a chance to get into the manufacturing world because they're limited by their little geographies. However, I think now with technology coming in, I think if there are ways that we can help women power coming into IT services, for example, where they don't really have to come into a big city. And I'm seeing a lot of really interesting stories in small little companies in these Coimbatore, Madurai, Mysore, smaller towns where a lot of encouraging things are happening. The 5th one is technology. I think that's where I really do believe that we in India can transform and catch up very quickly with the progress that China has made and other competing countries have made. And I think that could be a great equalizer as we adopt Industry 4.0, AI, and other technologies in terms of actually catching up very, very quickly. And the last one is the point that I know Vipin said, and I'd like to just reiterate the point of creating industrial parks to make the basic infrastructure to encourage manufacturing, whether it's in terms of land and sewage and electricity, all the basics. If we can create this, I think that could really help us significantly. Back to you, Azmat.
Thank you, Chief. It was great idea. Industrial parks, infrastructure, education, scaling, gender inclusivity, technology, competitive advantages that India must generate in order to capture a bigger share of the market. Sabine, I know you look at all of these issues on a global scale. Competition is inherent in what we do. What are your recommendations? What are your thoughts on this topic? And then carry on, if you can just add to this conversation, carry on. When you look at making investments in manufacturing across the world, what are the key issues that you look at very quickly, Sabine?
No, this was a very interesting point and conversation made. So thank you so much for inviting me to this very, very well-planned conference. So when you ask of what is the step forward, I always would look into what is it that you want. Not everyone will go the same pathway. So that is, I think, one major point for me. It's very hard to compete with the highest developed technologies, the countries that move, ahead, have complex economies. Where do you want to be? Where do you see your competitive advantage, and which one do you want to build up? And I think that will be different from country to country and region to region. So the drivers of production are absolutely key, and I think they have been mentioned in this conversation quite a lot for the development of the manufacturing sector. In production, I think it's the adoption of technology and then also the weighing off of how much does it make sense vis-a-vis my market and solving problems. The environmental side and the sustainability side will play a major role going forward, specifically as you're linking into value chains domestically as well globally. We only have one Earth. And as we're going forward, especially the growth targets that have been set in this for this region, you have to see how you get there. We cannot just repeat of how it's been done in the past. It cannot just building up production capacity without any regard to the environment. And I think as we're linking in value chains, the solving of problems along these value chains, specifically relating to sustainability, and I include social responsibility. I think we had one part of it, which is the gender inclusiveness, but also the environmental responsibility and sustainability in this. I think only if we include all of that, you will achieve your targets. And I hear this on electric mobility, and I am convinced that this is something that has to be pursued at a very broad level. But you will have huge competition in that one if that is your industrial strategy. So I think, what is it, that you want to achieve? Probably being the most sustainable textile industry, or be it, finding the best inclusion of IT technology in the development of your manufacturing sector, solving problems along the value chain or in sustainability. I would ask questions of where you want to be, what the ambitions of Tamil Nadu are. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabine. So all of those points you mentioned also relate to how you look at making investments in businesses and their preparedness with regard to the future and their mindset. So coming back to the topic that you just read about electrical mobility, you said there's a lot of competition in this, and I agree with you. I mean, everybody, they're looking at the whole value chain of electrical mobility. And both of our other panelists have mentioned this, especially Vipin, you are in the mobility area, and you're being questioned, you're being challenged. And a number of delegates are asking the same question. Are we really prepared in India? Are we really, from the infrastructure standpoint, to be really a global competitive player, even to implement mobility in India? And are we prepared to compete in this very competitive arena? What do you think, Vipin?
So is China ahead of us? The answer is yes. Having said that, there's a China sentiment around the world, and therefore India has to pick up on the sentiment. We have the opportunity. We have the frugality. You have to remember that wherever we do things, especially in India, but outside India as well, frugality in design can be a huge advantage for us. Yes, I think batteries is the big challenge. When you look at public transport, do we have an option? We don't, because the population, the civil society is challenging government and automobile manufacturers that they want a cleaner, they want a sustainable city or town to live in. And I think there's movement going there. Are we behind? The answer is yes. Do we have the opportunity to seize it? We must take it. I don't think we have an option. There are lots of people working on it.
I'm glad to hear that, and I would love to see us taking the lead on this topic. There will be a lot of discussion on the topic of including technology across all IoT, AI, everything else as part of Industry 4.0. And I know the TPU made some great points on this topic earlier. But how do we really build that culture? I know we have the technology, I know we have the people, but how do we build that culture to really become a global leader and capture that bigger part of the value chain? It's much easier said than done, I suspect. And we have a long, long way to go to compete with the rest of the world. I'd love to hear from you, TP, and then back to Sabine if you have some thoughts on how do you see us on a global scale?
Yeah, no, Azmat, I completely agree with you that at the end of the day, it is going to be a very, very daunting challenge for us to compete with the rest of the world. But I'll explain to you why I think we have the opportunity. If you think about it, if you take a macro level view over the last 20 years, a lot of the manufacturing, and I've spent most of my career in the US, a lot of the manufacturing in the US over the last 20 years has shifted from the West to the East, to China, Vietnam, India, etc. And as a result, I truly do believe that even when you look at Europe outside, like Sabine mentioned, outside Germany and a few other countries, a lot of the core manufacturing is actually shifted to our part of the world. And therefore, combining a couple of data points or dots together to the point that Vipin made on frugality, I really do believe that we in India know, small cars manufacturing. I truly believe we are now one of the world leaders in small car manufacturing because the cost points at which we have reached in frugal manufacturing. To pharmaceuticals, I think we are globally very, very competitive in pharmaceuticals. So to Sabine's point, let's pick those sectors where we can be globally competitive for a variety of reasons. Overlay with that, the fact that we do have the capabilities to do AI and machine learning and all these Industry 4.0 technologies to do it. Now, the challenge we have, Asmat, is this. We don't have the capital and the resources that people in the West have, and that limits our ability to do all these things. Three, given it's a frugal country, our ability to adopt some of these technologies sometimes becomes a challenge. And therefore, our entire IT services sector is more focused on providing these solutions to the West than it is to our own manufacturing sector because of our inability to compete at a cost-effective point. So those are some of the challenges we have, Asmat. But I really believe, and I go back to this, COVID is changing this. The discussions I've had with large corporations in India and even MSME companies in India in the last 7-8 months gives me a lot of hope that I think this is going to be the turning point where companies in India do realize that the world has shifted. If you don't get on the bandwagon, we're going to fall behind. And those companies in India that are able to adopt these newer technologies, we have the capabilities in India, but are able to adopt it and drive global standards. I think that'll make the difference in terms of catching up or competing with anybody in the world. That's just my perspective, Asmat, but I'm sure Sabine has a different perspective given from where she's sitting in Washington, D.C.
Sabine?
No, I think I fully agree. It's very good points made. I just want to take one point out. Technology is about adoption of technology. Technology is not an end goal. Technology comes out in, I don't know how many different forms. You can do something the same. You can produce the same product in manufacturing with low technology as you can produce it with high technology. For me, it is about technology and how you use technology and how you use it for increasing productivity and sustainability in production. And I think that has to be the absolute key. And it's not fear of technology of destroying jobs. It's about creating jobs. Let's start focusing on the creation part of technology and not on the destruction part of technology. It will always be both, and nothing is static. So as I said, in the framework that we have, we're not looking at where you are. We are looking at where you want to go. So where is it that you want to go? And you have choices. There is not one way that will lead you to the end. It is of what kind of strategy are you adopting? Is that strategy credible? And then we have a framework. We're looking at your production space, how you're producing, and the sustainability in production. And we're looking at drivers of production. But the over focus on drivers of production many times leads away of what happens in the company itself. It's very easy to say we don't have the infrastructure. We don't have what is needed to do, and very hard. This is why we can't do the investments. My experience is many times entrepreneurs, yes, that is something that is hindering investment. But if you have a good business case and you have a good opportunity to develop your business, you will overcome these challenges. And over time, because they're outside of you, this is not what you're doing. You're not investing in industrial parks. You're not investing in roads or IT infrastructure. You're investing in your core business, that is the manufacturing of products and anything that is connected to the manufacturing of products, in the process technology, in the product development or the product itself, and in the value chain. And you need to do it at scale if you are in a more low margin product and if you're manufacturing to make money. I think it's very clear, but you have to take into account sustainability. So I think corporate culture and mentality is very important for investment decision making. You gotta have a culture to take stakeholders of your company and of your value chain into account in everything that you're doing. And for me, for example, having a strategic objective to become, I think, the most forward-looking, sustainable manufacturer, for example, circular economy approaches, this is a huge challenge today. across the world. Very different from just saying, I want to become electric vehicle leaders, which is so much dependent on technology that has been developed outside of Tamil Nadu, on infrastructure development that is not within the control of many companies that are in the value chain of electric vehicles. The question is just, how do I solve problems that are within my control, and what is the next step that I can do? And using technology to the best that I can do to achieve objectives, not only in maximizing production profits, but also sustainability.
Sabine, thank you. The conversation is just about getting to be interesting. And it's unfortunate that we have to end within the next 1 minute or so. But, some of the key takeaways from me really today, cutting across with all of the themes, has been the subject of technology, the adoption of technology, the inclusion of technology, not as an end goal, but as part of the whole process of increasing manufacturing and increasing our share of the global value chain. And we have a competitive advantage in that. There are challenges, but the biggest challenge is the challenge of our own mindset, our ability to envision what we can be and set a strategy. And for that, it's really important that we get together in forums like this. What I take away from this really is that we need to strategize, and we need to think, and then we need to act. So we, at UEF, we welcome the opportunity. I really appreciate all our panel members coming together. Unfortunately, we have to end now. We are starting another very important session, and we haven't touched on this topic in this session, but we are going to talk about, we just touched on it. I think especially TP mentioned this about gender inclusivity, economic inclusion. All of us are very, very aware of it. Sabine, you and I have talked about this multiple times. Our next session is all about inclusion. And so I hope you are able to join that session. It is the last session of our overall plenary, sessions, and it's deliberately so because we believe that not only do we have to grow, if we have to grow at 1.5x, we must become more inclusive in our approach. Thank you very much, my panelists. Thank you very much, audience. We move on to our next session. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Growth acceleration. That's definitely what we need after the slowdown due to the lockdown that we have experienced over the last 10 months. I'm sure the lessons learned here will be put to